Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russia says it's hit Ukraine with a massive strike in retaliation for Bryansk terrorist attack. Lithuania says Russia can fight in Ukraine for at least 2 more years at the current level of intensity. And researchers say the U.S. is the likely perpetrator behind the Nord Stream blasts, which sabotage economy and harm the environment. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia fired a huge wave of missiles across Ukraine yesterday as people slept, knocking out power and critical infrastructure. Mr. Zelensky also added that specialized teams were working to restore the operation of energy facilities. The mass strikes on targets far from the fronts were the first such wave since mid-February and shattered the longest calm since Moscow began an air campaign against Ukraine's civil infrastructure 5 months ago.
I
have held several meetings today about the consequences of the massive strike on our infrastructure. Another attempt by a terrorist state to wage war against a civilized society has resulted in temporary blackouts of electricity, heat and water in some of our regions and cities. The Russian missiles took the lives of 6 Ukrainians. Restoration works at energy facilities continue all day. The most difficult is in Kharkiv in the Zhytomyr region. It is not easy in Odessa, in Kiev, in Zaporizhia. Repair teams, power engineering specialists, local authorities, central government, everyone will work as long as necessary to restore power supply to the cities and areas that experience problems at the moment. And by the way, as a result of this strike, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant was again disconnected from the power grid. This is a critical situation, and Russia is deliberately creating such critical situations at our nuclear facilities.
Meanwhile, Russia says that its forces carried out that massive retaliatory strike on Ukrainian infrastructure after what it called a terrorist attack in Russia's Bryansk region, which borders Ukraine, last week. The Russian Defense Ministry says that it hit Ukrainian defense companies and other military infrastructure with a range of weapons, including the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. It said it had destroyed targets, including drone bases and sites producing ammunition, and disrupted the transport of foreign weapon supplies across Ukraine by rail.
To terrorist acts in Bryansk region on March 2nd this year, organized by the Kyiv regime. The Russian armed forces have dealt a massive retaliatory strike. High-precision, long-range air, sea and land-based weapons, including the Kinzhal hypersonic missile system, hit key elements of Ukraine's military infrastructure, military-industrial complex enterprises, as well as energy facilities that provide them. The goal was achieved. All assigned targets are hit. As a result of the strike, the bases of attack on manned aerial vehicles were destroyed. The transfer of reserves and rail transportation of foreign weapons was disrupted, and production facilities for the repair of military equipment and the production of ammunition were disabled.
Russia's Defense Ministry spokesperson, Lieutenant General Igor Konachenkov. Meanwhile, the leader of Moldova's breakaway region of Transnistria says his government will appeal to the United Nations Security Council to investigate a terrorist act and ensure the region's security after separatists there said they had thwarted a Ukrainian attempt to assassinate him. Mr. Vadim Krasnodelsky said, quote, "I have already instructed the foreign minister to prepare appeals to all members of the UN Security Council," adding that it was important to look into this situation and ensure our safety. And the UN Atomic Watchdog Director General Rafael Grossi says the Russian-held Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine has lost all external power supply. He says it is relying on diesel generators, a last line of defense, to prevent meltdowns from overheating a reactor fuel.
Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is running on emergency diesels. The last line of defense. This is the sixth time. Let me say it again. This is the sixth time that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has lost all off-site power and has had to operate in this emergency mode. Let me remind you, this is the largest nuclear power station in Europe, operating for the sixth time under emergency diesel generators. What are we doing? How can we sit here in this room this morning and allow this to happen? This cannot go on. I am astonished by the complacency. Yes, the complacency. What are we doing to prevent this from happening? We are the IAEA. We are meant to care about nuclear safety. Each time we are rolling a dice. And if we allow this to continue time after time, then one day our luck will run out. I call on everyone in this room today and elsewhere. We must commit to protect the safety and security of the plant, and we need to commit now. What we need is action, and we know what this means. I will continue my urgent consultations and contacts to protect the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Please support me.
The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, they're making a passionate appeal over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And the chief of Lithuania's military intelligence said Russia has enough resources to continue the war in Ukraine for 2 more years at the current levels of intensity. Lithuania's intelligence chief Aleksandras Palovicius said, quote, how long Russia is able to wage a war will also depend on the support for Russia's military from states such as Iran and North Korea. And China's President Xi Jinping has secured his third 5-year term in an unprecedented move to tighten his grip to become the country's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. Nearly 3,000 members of China's rubber stamp parliament, the National People's Congress, the NPC, voted unanimously in the Great Hall of the People for 69-year-old Mr. Xi to be president in an election where there was no other candidate, and with voting lasting for about an hour, and the electronic counting completed in about 15 minutes. For Mr. Xi, the stage was set for another term when he did away with presidential term limits in the year 2018. Last October, his power was already extended when he was reconfirmed for another 5 years as General Secretary of the Central Committee of the ruling Communist Party of China. And the Kremlin says it's doubted that the attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines last September could have been carried out without state support. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov's comments came after the New York Times this week reported that U.S. officials were looking into whether a pro-Ukrainian non-government group was responsible for the blasts. Authorities in Sweden, Germany, and Denmark, who are currently investigating the blasts, say the explosions were deliberate, but have not said who might be responsible. Meanwhile, researchers from Canada and Denmark say the lack of political mobilization for an investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline explosions indicates the U.S. government could be the, quote, likely perpetrator of the act of economic sabotage, which has wider environmental consequences in the area. Questions have been raised after an article published early last month by former Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh claimed that U.S. divers had installed explosives under the Nord Stream pipelines during the NATO BALTOPS, that's the Baltic Operations military exercise in June, before detonating them 3 months later on September the 26th. And Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says that the European Union is completely ignoring any talks on the need to carry out an investigation of the Nord Stream gas pipeline blasts. Russia has repeatedly asked to be joined in the investigations into the blasts, which ruptured 3 of the 4 pipelines of Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas links that connect Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea. Elsewhere, Danish police have searched for a yacht on a tiny Baltic Sea island near the Nord Stream pipeline blast sites. German authorities confirmed that they had raided the ship in January that may have been used to transport explosives used to blow up the pipelines. Søren Thim Andersen, the highest authority on the island of Christiansø, said the police was also searching for a specific boat that had moored there in September. Christiansø is part of a small archipelago of about 18 kilometers northeast of the Baltic Sea island of Bornholm. Let's talk to Tom Rosett, Associate Professor of Intelligence Studies, Head of the Ukrainian Program at the Norwegian Defense University College. He joins us virtually from Oslo. Good morning to you, Tom. Nice to see you again.
Good morning, Ladi. Nice to see you.
Great. Let's start off from this Nord Stream blast. Of course, you are in Norway, and that's one country that is extremely interested in finding out what exactly happened to that pipeline. Are you surprised at the news coming out of the United States that it is possible that, this act may have either been supported or may actually be coming from the United States?
I think that's very premature to conclude on. And if you look at, you mentioned in the report here about Seymour and his allegations, and including in his sort of analysis of this, where I would say cherry-picking different issues. He claims that Norway indeed has been sort of the one dropping a sensor from a military airplane and causing the blast, and also making claims that our former Prime Minister and now NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg is a CIA operative and has been there since he was 16 years old. So it's looking from Norway, his credibility is very low. That plane was not in that area at all, and it's not probable that Jens Stoltenberg was a CIA operative when he was 16 years old. So, I mean, we don't put much emphasis on his analysis. He was a great investigative journalist many years ago, but since have been diving into conspiracy theories, and I think this is an example of that. But when it comes to Norway, we are very interested in finding out what really happened, because we have a lot of pipelines going to the continent ourselves, and if this is something that can happen, we certainly wants to try to prevent it from further destroying any pipelines. So this is, yes, a strong focus in Norway.
I want to find out from you, Tom, about who the likely suspects have been, because this investigation, as we've reported, has been ongoing since the incident happened in September, and we're no closer to identifying who exactly did it. But that'll be after the break, so please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Investigations continue into what caused the explosions of the Nord Stream pipelines. Western countries believe the explosions were deliberate, but have not concluded on who was behind them. A report by German ARD broadcaster and Zeit newspaper said German authorities have been, however, able to identify the boat used for the alleged sabotage operation. According to this report, investigators found traces of explosives on that boat, which a group of 5 men and 1 woman took from Russia Rostock in Germany on September the 6th. Among the most important German seaports, Rostock is currently in 4th position. The German city in the federal state of Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, is situated less than 300 kilometers to the Danish island of Bornholm, close to where the blasts occurred in September of 2022. Let's get back to Tom Rosette of the Ukraine program at the Norwegian Defense University College in Oslo. Tom, thanks for staying tuned. Again, another report, this time now from Germany. I mean, before the break, we were talking about the United States. It does seem as if the longer this has gone on, the more complicated it has become. Why do you think that is?
It is because it's hard to attribute. It's hard to say who really did this, even though you find some evidence. Who ordered this group, according to the German report, and this boat to do this action. I mean, even though you can prove what kind of explosives they used, you might trace it towards a specific country, possibly, I mean, Russia, Ukraine, Poland, or the US. It doesn't say who really actually did it or who ordered it. So, I mean, even though you get some indication, it could be deliberate that they used some other nations' explosive production material. So that's why it's challenging, and that's why I think also they want to wait to do the investigation thoroughly, and that's why Denmark and Sweden is waiting to conclude this, because they want to find out not only the type of explosives, but also hopefully who did this and who ordered it, and that's a challenge.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned, of course, Sweden and Denmark, and then, of course, you have Norway. You did tell me earlier on that, of course, Norway is also equally interested in knowing who did this, because there's a lot of pipeline infrastructure in that area. And so, but can I ask, how much impact has this had on the internal supplies of gas, particularly, but also of other fuel products to those three countries, Denmark, Sweden, and where you are in Norway?
Well, Norway is first and foremost now the remaining main provider of gas to the European continent. Sweden is not a producer in the same way. Denmark in some way as well. They have some resources in the sea, but Norway is after Russia. And Russia is now basically terminated as a provider to the European continent. It has some gas exports, but very little. So if the pipelines from Norway to Europe is sabotaged in the same way, that will create a dramatic crisis in the gas situation in Europe. So. I mean, that's the risk, and this war can make some actors do such actions. And if somebody hits the Norwegian network, it certainly is in the interest of Russia to make Europe suffer on the energy side. So even though it's hard to attribute, that would be the main perpetrator in the Western European view, at least.
All right. Now, let me bring you closer to the conflict directly. I mean, the immediate conflict on the ground. So much has been said about the battle for the eastern city of Bakhmut. We've heard that name a lot in the last couple of weeks and a couple of months. So many people were wondering what was the importance of this city and why, was Russia so insistent pouring in troops and equipment and money there. And then why were the Ukrainians themselves so steadfast in defense? Well, only a couple of days ago, the Ukrainian president said, look, if we lose Bakhmut, then the whole of the east is open and Russia can actually rampage all the way up to Kiev. I mean, that was an admission as to why it was important. But what do you make of the entire issue of Bakhmut?
Well, Bakhmut in itself is not really that important. It's important on the tactical level, meaning that it's a city, a small city that have roads that leads westwards. But the city itself is symbolically important because the war has been going on in that city for almost 8 months. And it's been sort of the main arena where some of the Russian forces have been making their strongest effort. And it's symbolic because all the resources both sides have put into this area. And that's why it's also politically important to not give in for Zelensky, but it could be absolutely tactically smart to move out and inflict as much damage on the Russian side in doing that, if that is possible. But the city itself is not that important. I think Ukraine has a very good position west of the city, and also the next two cities that's more important. That would be Kramatorsk further west and Slavyansk also further west northwest. I think it might be wise for the Ukrainians to pull out and then save resources for a counteroffensive later on, because the Russians they have really made a lot of minor advantage that's inflicted a lot of casualties and deaths on the Russian side. So I think this is symbolic, tactically a win, of course, but not strategically important.
Let's look from there at the issue of equipment. Earlier in this year, there was quite a lot of hubbub over the issue of what was the Western alliance was going to be able to send to Ukraine, the kind of support the Russians were going to get from Iran, North Korea, China, and the likes, and so on. That seems to have subsided somewhat. But I want to ask you, in terms of the strategy going forward, the Western alliance has promised Ukraine tanks. We don't know how many of those tanks have actually arrived in Ukraine, whether they be Challenger tanks or Leopard 2 tanks or the Marder fighting vehicles or the Abrams tanks from the US. So, I mean, how much of an immediate impact is the idea of better equipment, newer equipment from all these allies going to be for Ukraine, especially because they have not arrived?
That's true. Just a few of them have arrived from Poland, and I think the main bulk of the tanks will arrive in the coming 1 or 2 months. It takes some time because you have to have the logistics set up, how to provide ammunition, and also maintenance of all these tanks. In addition, the West have decided to send a lot of lighter armored vehicles that have a small cannon and also infantry, 5 or 6 infantry inside, and that's combined, this will make the Ukrainian effort a lot stronger, both in defending Ukraine, but also in possible counter-offensives that's expected to be in the fall, in the spring now when the soil dries up. So I think this will strengthen the Ukrainian hand significantly, but of course, it depends on the continued delivery of ammunition. And we see now, for example, that the delivery of artillery ammunition is quite challenging for Western Europe because they're not in a war-producing situation.
Yeah, because I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday there was the plea at the level of the EU. There was the 1 billion euros that they were talking about to help the countries that had already sent ammunition and equipment of the lighter sort to Ukraine, and then another 1 billion euros to help the countries that are supposed to produce more to be able to be sent to Ukraine to do so. That is there, but how much of a risk is there that, you know, many of the countries like Poland and so on, particularly, who have sent ammunition and equipment to Ukraine themselves are now vulnerable to attack because they didn't have too many of those to start off with. I know that when Britain was saying it was going to send 12 Challenger tanks, some of the British establishment were saying, how many of these tanks do we have? If you send them 12, we ourselves are not going to have that many left to defend ourselves should there be need to. So again, you know, strategically, how is this playing out?
Well, it's a good point, and that's something each state in Europe is considering: how much risk should one take in providing Ukraine while remaining some for defending in a possible scenario in a war with Russia. But also Russia is considering this. So keep in mind of that. Russia is diminishing its resources elsewhere. On the land force side and also on the missile side. So Russia is actually not considering the risk of war with NATO as high, because it's, for example, north of Norway on our border with Russia, there's almost no land forces left at all, only naval and aerial assets. So both sides are considering to strengthen Ukraine or the border, the front line in Ukraine, and a lesser emphasis on defense elsewhere.
Indeed. My final question before I let you go, Tom, is about the grain deal, that deal that Turkey and the United Nations brokered in June of last year. It's due up for renewal again on the 18th of March, and we're hearing familiar noises that we heard in November, particularly from the Russians, about non-compliance with its provisions. So I want to ask you, do you think that deal will be renewed? Is it in the interest of both parties to have it renewed, or is it more in the interest of Ukraine than Russia?
I think it will be renewed, but it will not be extended to other ports in Ukraine. And it will possibly not be extended for a full year that Ukraine hopes for. It will be only 4 months like we have seen. But Russia is hoping to gain something more of this. It wants to diminish more of its obstacles in exporting ammonium, and it hopes to gain something of this more than what it already gained. So I think Russia is seeking to blackmail somewhat Ukraine and the UN and Turkey on this, and threatening to pull out. But I hope they come to their senses and continue this deal, because it's so important for grain stability and grain prices globally.
Indeed, Tom, thank you so very much. Tom Rosette, Associate Professor at the Norwegian Defence University College in Oslo. As always, interesting perspective, interesting views. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
The United States and its allies have blocked or seized more than $58 billion worth of assets owned or controlled by sanctioned Russians in the past year, as Western governments continue to dial up the pressure over the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine. That's according to a joint statement from a multinational sanctions enforcement task force. The Russian elite, proxies and oligarchs task force held its 6th multilateral deputies meeting to discuss the group's continued work and pledge their efforts to punish Russian President Vladimir Putin and his associates. The task force is a joint effort between the US, Australia, Canada, Germany, Italy, France, Japan, the UK, and the European Commission. The task force, which was formed last March, is also taking further steps to crack down on sanctions evasion as the US and its allies work to seal the cracks in a sanctions regime that has weakened but not crippled the Russian economy. And South Korean media says Hyundai Motor Company, which suspended operations last March, is in talks with a Kazakh company to sell its manufacturing plant in Russia. Many factories in Russia have suspended production and furloughed workers due to equipment shortage and sanctions since Moscow invaded Ukraine last year. Negotiations to sell Hyundai's plant in St. Petersburg to a car-related company in Astana, Kazakhstan, are in the final stages, and the deal could be signed as early as June. All right, when we return, of course, the business news out of this conflict, plus color, feathers, and sequins characterize the not-so-quiet fashion scene at this year's Oscars. Details in a moment. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Warm welcome back. Here's Ini John Mekwa joining me. I don't know why I keep rubbing my hands like that anytime I see you. Binance.
Money, it means money. So I'm here for the money.
We're having cash crunch. We're having cash crunch, as you very well know. Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange by transaction volume, has banned Russians and individuals residing in Russia from using its P2P system. What is that?
So, I mean, this is the third time we're going to be talking about something that seems that in spite of the sanctions, individuals and corporates had been finding way to cut the sanctions. So this is the third one this week that's been discovered. So, I mean, we all know cryptocurrency, and Binance is a platform that's being used for trading of cryptocurrency. So it seems what has been happening is individuals in Russia, you remember we talked about the government has extended the ban receiving foreign currency.
Absolutely.
So some smart individuals go to Binance and, you know, like peer-to-peer, that means just between two individuals who are on the platform. So an individual in Russia that wants to send, because here they've banned them from buying euros and dollars and things like that. So they will use ruble, buy cryptocurrency, sell it to another person, that's the other pair, in outside the country, and the person withdraws that same money, but withdraws it in dollar. You understand?
Which makes sense.
No sanctions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's been banned now.
That's been banned, and it's also been banned the other way too. If you're in EU, you're in any of the European Union countries, you cannot transact in rubles or get rubles through Binance. So, I mean, it's two-way thing. You guys are enemies. Please stay enemies. Don't use our platform to circumvent the sanctions that have been placed on you. So,
as you said it on Monday when we talked about ramping up the pressure and then dodging. And then dodging the pressure. So, I mean, all of this is in that respect. Yeah. Russia's top diplomat said that it would be quite complicated.
Yes.
For Moscow to sign on to a renewal of the grain deal.
I heard you say this.
Yeah, we were talking about that with Thomas.
You know, we talked about it yesterday that everyone seems, and to tell you, yesterday we saw that the price of grain had reduced because of that.
Everybody was assuming that it was
there's a reaction. You know, after this statement, there's a reaction now. The price of grain has increased anymore because it doesn't look likely. And I mean, if you want to look at it from the Russian part, they are saying this is just half measure. You have sanction that you say is not directly affecting our fertilizer and our food, but you have sanction that affects the logistics,
or being able to move it.
And so you're indirectly affecting our food and fertilizer, and this is our own demand, you know, in getting this
deal to continue. If you don't do this, we won't do that.
And guess what? I also saw this morning that Russia's exports of their grain has increased for January and February. So Russia might be doing some work underneath with the yet again. I mean, just the same way Saudi Arabia and UAE are getting their diesel and all of that.
Absolutely.
It seems that some people who are getting cheap cheap grains at this time.
Of course, I mean, it always comes back to the issue of, I mean, these are human beings involved in all of this.
And survival of an individual is first.
Paramount. Now, Ukraine, the European Commission, and Romania are meeting on alternative routes for exports. Now, we come to the other side of this now. The Russians have made it difficult, nay, impossible for the Ukrainians to go through their traditional routes for export.
So there's need for alternative. So now Ukraine is talking to Romania, and there's a river, they call it Danube River. So they're trying to create a route there. Already we heard that, I think last month or 2 months ago, Ukraine has started dredging that river to create a route. But of course, we know it might be kind of difficult for Ukraine at this time.
And it will take time.
It will take time, exactly, which is why everyone is asking for this renewal of the deal, which has to be done before the 18th.
Absolutely, because that's next weekend.
Exactly.
18th is next Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I think it's Saturday. We have our election
on the 18th, right?
Yeah, so they're trying to find an alternative, perhaps for the future, because at this time, a country at war does not really have that much resources
to be able to pursue this kind of thing.
And it's very capital intensive, but anyway, they'll try, and they're talking, and countries like Romania that would have even helped also, they also have their own
challenges as a result of this.
Of the war also. So, nobody's really that free or that rich enough with extra unused resources.
That they can plow into this.
Exactly. Nigerians will say, money that you're not using.
Now, speaking about alternatives, the Chinese are building a railway into Russia. Again, another way for Russia
the war is actually getting people very creative, getting economists thinking and routes. But there are always two ways to it. So China is trying to build this rail from the northern part of China to the eastern part. They call it Sakha Republic of Russia. To be able to. Now, this route is rather long and somewhat off the borders of China and Russia. And Russia has tried to build this rail before, but it's very expensive, and it goes rather, all those routes that are somewhere in the bush.
Some up, some down.
Exactly.
You have to dig tunnels, climb over mountains, and so on. Very difficult terrain.
Very difficult. So Russia had to abandon that idea. But now China wants to take it up, and they want to sponsor it. Because from Sakha, they can get coal, they can get timber, and a whole lot of resources, which is good for Russia at this time, because, of course...
That's another avenue for revenue. Exactly. I mean, if they can get the products out.
Then that's another. Then you can look away from the West and some of the sanctions.
And you're now looking east.
But the problem is, wouldn't that make Russia over-dependent on China? And all of these countries are trying to be giants of the world. Wouldn't that indirectly feed China into being a giant of the world? That's another part of the argument, because that means that Russia would have no alternative, because obviously if China is going to construct that road, they're going to construct it from Russia to China, so you can only go through China. And if they decide to close that route, then you don't have
problems. But these are issues for the future. As you said before, this is about surviving now.
But even this is for the future, because it's a huge infrastructure.
So it's not due anytime soon.
It's not due anytime soon. We don't pray that the war will last that long. Hopefully, we pray.
Hopefully it would. Thanks, Ini. Very interesting developments on all sides. Everybody trying to survive. Ini and her crew will be, of course, on Business Morning and Business Incorporated to tell you about how other business people are trying to survive too, even those not associated with the Russia-Ukraine war. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you.
Now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has launched a new attempt to get Finland and Sweden accepted as members of the world's biggest military organization by the time U.S. President Joe Biden and his counterparts meet for their next summit in July. Representatives from the Nordic neighbors and Turkey met at NATO headquarters in Brussels, where Mr. Stoltenberg organized the talks after convincing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan last month to come back to the table. Opening the meeting, Mr. Stoltenberg said that Finland and Sweden have taken unprecedented steps to address legitimate Turkish security concerns. The three countries agreed that a rapid ratification for both Finland and Sweden would be in everybody's interest, and that their membership will strengthen the alliance. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov During a press conference with his Saudi Arabian counterpart, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud says the Saudi Arabia and other Arabic countries had facilitated prisoners of war swaps with Ukraine. The Saudi foreign minister said that his country is committed to achieving a peaceful solution of the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Among the incentives put forward by Riyadh are those aimed at swap of prisoners of war. The latest such operation unfolded under the personal supervision of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Iran's longest-held American prisoner has made an emotional plea to U.S. President Joe Biden to put, quote, the liberty of innocent Americans above politics and ramp up efforts to secure his release. Siamak Namazi, who was speaking in an interview from Iran's notorious event prison, said, quote, I remain deeply worried that the White House just doesn't appreciate how dire our situation has become. The 51-year-old Mr. Namazi was arrested in 2015 when he was on a business trip to Iran in what the United Nations has described as an arbitrary detention. He was charged with having relations with a hostile state, referring to the United States, where Mr. Namazi is a dual Iranian-U.S. national. The United States has accused Iran of taking Mr. Namazi and other imprisoned foreign nationals in Iran hostage. And finally on the program, be prepared for pops of color and lots of sparkle on this year's Oscars red carpet. The social media personality Curtis Nearbill says celebrities have upped the stakes this award season and chosen bolder and more interesting looks. Browsing the rails at the Cult Gear West Hollywood flagship store, Mr. Nearbill picked out his top trends and styles, predicting feathers, sequins, and bright colors to feature heavily on the Oscars carpet this Sunday. Mr. Nearbill said his top tip for the day would be to find an outfit that suits the celebrity's energy and sense of style.
This year has actually been better. I've actually been very much impressed. Everyone seems to be going for it a little bit more than they have been previous years. Because that's what we want to see. Like, the people want to see something that's exciting. They want to see something that's different. They want to see something that's more than just the classic tux or dress. You know, like, we want to be excited, and we want to see you stand out, you know? So this year, I think people have really been doing that. So you can see right here with this one and this one, like, the feathers are something that you possibly could be seeing on this red carpet. These like nice, like light colors, I think are very exciting, and we're going to be seeing more of as well. And you can see this one, we've got like the embroidery and the sequins. I feel like this is a good representation of kind of some of the stuff that you're going to be seeing this year on the carpet.
Even while the grim business of war continues in Ukraine, elsewhere, even in states associated with that conflict, life must go on. That's our program this morning. My name is Ladi Akeredoluale. Thanks for joining us. To have a pleasant day and weekend ahead. Good morning.